All right, so we're in Rome, which is entered by Constantine for the first time in his life. He's born in London, England. The day after he defeats Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, in the year 312 CE, October 28th. So on October 29th, he enters the city. He finds one monument that he decides to repurpose, the basilica that was constructed by Maxentius. It's part and parcel, in a way. You can think of it as the first public civic structure constructed in Rome for quite a while, like a century. And the first since the imperial fora to make a monumental architectural addition to the governing area of the city. This facility, Constantine, as I say, repurposed. It was originally dedicated in the year 306, and it was rededicated in the year 313 with two major changes. One, the axis was switched from the short side to the long side, so now you entered as if, what sorts of buildings do you enter that have a long axis? So you enter on the short side and you look down the long entirety of the building. What sorts of buildings are those? Megara. And in classical times, what other sorts? In classical times. So we haven't seen any palaces, actually. What's on the top of the Acropolis in Athens? Yep. Yeah, temples. Right. A temple is, and why? What's the point? Well, when you enter on the short side, looking down the long axis of the building, as here, it increases the experience of awe. It increases the grandeur factor. And that's the point. And at the far end was this monumental 10 times life-size seated statue of Constantine himself. Hand upraised, eyes upraised. There is a point in representation when size and style not only signify a difference in quantity, but an actual difference in quality. And we can easily understand the point of a 10 times larger than life-size statue. This person is not of our world. This person is on a higher plateau. This is the message of the reliefs on the doors at Persepolis, the palaces of the Persian kings, with the kings much larger, the kings way up high, the kings fighting lions with their heads a little bit higher than the heads of the lions. This is a message of divinity. Inside the city proper, down the road from the Basilica, on the triumphal procession route, the Senate voted to honor Constantine with an arch, and that's what's circled in blue. It's in a nice open piece of real estate at the back end of the Palatine Hill. This is the Palatine Hill. Between the Palatine and the Colosseum, right where the triumphal route comes through the Circus Maximus and then makes its turn to go up into and through the Forum, past the Arch of Titus, through the now century-old Arch of Septimius. So in terms of position, the Arch of Constantine shares with the Arch of Titus and the Arch of Septimius a spot on the triumphal route. That's why we call it a triumphal arch, because it's on that route. In terms of form, it's pretty close copy of the Arch of Septimius Severus. Triple arch, the middle arch is a little bit higher. There's pictorial panels above the two side arches. So the decorative schema is the same as, just the layout of it is the same as the Arch of Septimius. And in terms of the event that the inscription honors, which monument is the Arch of Constantine most similar to? This is just a little reprise from last time. According to the inscription on the Arch of Constantine, what monument, were you to be a scholar of Roman monumental history living in the city in the 4th century, what monument would you relate this to? The Actium building. Why? Inscription, yes. Prisoners, no. There are no prisoners shown on the Actium monument at all. What's the evidence of war on the Actium monument? The rams, the ship's rams. Right, so it's spoils. It's spoils.
Yeah, doesn't it also claim that the like acting like it's an outside force?
Yes, exactly. The Arch of Constantine, the inscription says that he freed Rome from the tyrant, acting as if it's an outside force. That's exactly right. And that is similar to? Right, they're not mentioned by name. It's just it's freed them from the enemy. Way in the back. Another point? Same points? Excellent. Okay. So we were taking a tour around the Arch of Constantine, and we have ended up on the north side where we're going to look at the last two Constantinian friezes. Here's one underneath the Hadrianic roundels. I think a roundel is a word that was invented for the Arch of Constantine, and it means, of course, a round thing. Hadrianic roundels. All right, so this scene is what's come to be a type scene in Roman art, and type scenes get these cute Latin names. This one is the Donatio. This is what we would think of today as welfare. In the Roman era, beginning with Augustus, and actually prior to Augustus, not even beginning with him, but beginning with the great generals, the generals who controlled lots of legions and had lots of money in the late Republic, in the late 2nd and the 1st century BCE, Pompey, Julius Caesar, etc. They would put on games. They would, out of their own pocket, put on athletic events that would last for many days. And there would be food and money handouts in conjunction with these events. A triumph, when a triumph was celebrated, there would be this dispensation of goods, of money and goods, and that was called a donatio. And the scene on the Arch of Constantine indeed shows such an event. There is a seated figure in the middle, and on either side, what you see are, on the lower register, people with their hands out, people waiting in line, children, mothers with kids, and people of all ages lined up. And then up here in these little office slots, you see a record keeper, somebody with a great big scroll, and somebody with a little table, and they're figuring out how to dispense the goods. A word about, that's that scene right up there. A word about style, which is not something we talk about very much in this class. What's the scene on the top? What monument is it from? from the Parthenon frieze. 2 or 3 significant style differences between the Parthenon frieze and the Constantinian frieze on the bottom. Go. Chat.
The one on the Arch, that's much more cartoonish. It seems like it's designed to be exactly, it's easier to see as opposed to which makes it a little more
All right. Tell me something.
The bottom one is more, the people are more independent.
The people are more independent, you mean distinct?
Yeah, more distinct.
And these are more repetitive? So these are the, well, yeah, that's a little bit of an accident of the particular part of the scene that I showed, because there are people doing lots of different things on the Parthenon frieze. But and part of that has to do with the different format. So the Parthenon frieze, 524 feet, continuous frieze, and so if you have a lot of people and doing a lot of people on horseback, or for example, the people who are carrying the water jugs, and you have that section, it's true that they all look like they're doing the same thing. And the setup of this particular panel is distinct, but you might think about the bottom of this frieze where all the people are just standing there with their hands up. So that's a little bit more the same. In the white shirt all the way in the back. Yes, the relief is deeper. The relief is much deeper, and as a consequence, it's easier to make out the figures, make out the individual figures. These, the relief is lower. Something else?
Proportion and detail.
What do you mean by proportion?
Proportion, the bottom of the heads are kind of huge.
Yeah.
And they're not, they look more like caricatures than people, as defined as the top.
Absolutely. Did other people come up with that as a difference? Yes. That is the single most commonly cited aspect of style for Constantinian period art. That the proportions now are wholly skewed. The heads, it's like a doll for a baby, where you've got one of those gigantic plastic heads and then just the body. So the heads are way out of proportion to the rest of the body, and that makes them look cartoonish. These are naturalistic, and by that I mean that the proportions between the head and the body, the head should be 1/7 of the body, in case you were curious, is precise, is what it should be.
The robes are like in much more detail on the top than the bottom. There's like shadow detail on the top, and there's all these like details in the robes, and then down here there's just lines.
Right, that was probably part of your point too about the detail, the robes. So here you see the robes in all their fidelity. You see all of the folds and the curves and the depth, even though the relief is shallower, and so the sculptor has less room to work. the effect is much more lifelike. Here there's more depth of field, but the sculptor has not taken advantage of it. The artist is not bothered with the level of detail that you have here. And of course what that does, that choice makes, along with the enlarged heads, makes these figures look more like symbols than like reality.
They're kind of cramped in the left one. They're like trying to be as small as possible. No one's staying.
Well, the scene, of course, is showing them seated, but they are completely out of proportion, even so. So this is the entirety of the box, and this figure, for example, the head is, just a little bit under half his body height. So that's ridiculous. I mean, they could be shown seated and shown realistically. So if you're going to have this figure on a chair, then this guy should be a lot lower, and his head should be a lot smaller. But instead, even though they're all in different poses, the heads are all the same size. So, say what?
The guy on the left also looks like he's really low.
What about the angle of the faces and the heads looking out at you? Comparing these two. In the top one, they're all facing the same way, and that is what's called a three-quarter view. Well, actually, this guy's profile. But nobody is making any effort to look straight out. The sculptor has not tried to make sure that any of them maintain eye contact with you. Instead, they are engaged with each other. And here, there's been a real effort to make sure that you, the viewer, when you look up at these, the sculptor wants you to see their facial features. Now, one of these is not better than the other. They're different, and they're different on purpose. This communicates a sense of the reality of a scene, and you may think that that's better and that it's more natural, but it's harder to read. It's harder to get the point. With this, it's easier to get the point. The heads are big in proportion to everything else. They stick out. The eyes are making contact with you. There's no extraneous detail. There's none of this fluff with the robes and the folds and the shadows and all of that. Forget it. Unnecessary, not germane. So in terms of communicating with you, the point of this, it's a sort of postage stamp, what's going on here. You can tell much more quickly and readily what's going on here. It's more communicative. This is more realistic. This is more communicative. One is not better than the other. They're just different. On the other, so that was the Donatio was right there, and here on the other of the Constantinian friezes on the side is a scene where the emperor speaks. The emperor speaks. It's like a press conference, and he sits on the main speaking platform in the forum, which is the rostrum. And from there, he gives a speech, which is an oratorial. And what you see here are bunches of people lined up on either side of the speaking platform, and the speaking platform is very clearly delineated. And this is very cute. Look. Behind the people lined up on either side are monuments. Here's the arches of a basilica. This could be one of the victory arches that's to one side of the rostrum. This triple arch right here is the Arch of Septimius. This is the Arch of Septimius that's just to the right of the rostrum. So this is set very firmly in a specific recognizable place. The point is that the speech is being given from the rostrum itself. Now here you see two details of either side of the rostrum. There are columns in the background and robes raised up on placards, textiles to like decorate, like flags, for example. And on either side of the rostrum are two seated figures. So there's the scene, there's the middle of the scene. And here are the two seated figures. These are not, these people are not alive. They are statues. They are statues on either side of this scene. And they are bearded statues, large statues, so they are 2nd century CE emperors, because those are the bearded emperors. Those are the guys with all the beards, starting with Hadrian. Probably one of them is Hadrian, and one of them is Marcus Aurelius. Could be Antoninus Pius. We can't, they're cartoonish enough that we cannot really tell specifically. And it doesn't really matter that we can't tell. Anybody in Rome at this time would have been able to tell, because from here they could have just walked right down the triumphal procession route to the Forum, and they would have seen this exact scene. So this is a snapshot of an event that the Senate wanted to have commemorated strongly enough that they devoted one of the frieze panels on the Arch of Constantine to this. And Constantine, check out the bird, just to give you a nice sense of scale. Isn't that cute? So here now is the middle scene here, and this monumental seated figure raised up on a high platform, of course, is the emperor himself. He's lost his head, sadly, in the frieze on the arch. But there is no doubt that this figure is Constantine in the moment of addressing the city, the Senate, and the people of Rome for his first official greeting and speech in the city. And this seated figure contrasts, both evokes and contrasts nicely with the one which would have been in the Basilica. It evokes it because it's the same pose. It contrasts because this one is larger than life, but on the arch, he is within the ranks of the people. He's raised above them, but he is not larger than life in this context. The piers. This is the point on victory arches, well, at least on the Arch of Septimius, where we get the action figure sequences, right? Like on the Arch of Septimius, where we had Parthian captives bound, being dragged along or pushed along by Roman soldiers. Now that would be a problem for the Arch of Constantine, because who would the captives be? This is touchy. This is a touchy little problem for the Senate. What are they going to do with this? And this is not a place where they can hack something off another monument, because if you hack something off this part of the monument falls down. So now, it's one thing to remove a panel. It's another thing to take apart the pier that is part of the supporting apparatus of the arch. So these had to be carved in the time of Constantine. So what do we have? We have Victoria, the same gal who is in the chariot with Titus in one of the great big panels in the Arch of Titus, recognizable by the fact that she's got gigantic wings. She is the Roman version of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Nike, like the shoes, however you guys say them. I always bum my kids out when we go to a store and I say, oh, we're looking for some Nikes, and they go, oh. She is here also on the front of the piers, and what she has before her is a kneeling figure. So a Roman kneeling in conjunction with, in front of, Victoria herself. Not captive, but acquiescent. And elsewhere, a trophy. This is a typical Roman trophy, is a soldier's tunic raised up on a pier, and there would be shields on either side of it, and then various soldiers standing around. So the aura of victory without the enemy. So, the Arch of Constantine is this amalgamated monument with Constantinian sculpture on the piers, the spandrels of the arch where there are more victories, the friezes, the inscription, Trajan's prisoners from his forum, Hadrian's hunting monument roundels, and Marcus Aurelius's panels. And the institution sending this message is the Senate, and the main recipient is Constantine. And secondarily, the people of Rome, who now must adjust themselves to the rule of this essentially outsider and usurper. And the question is now, what is the message that the Senate is sending? A, to Constantine, and B, to the people of Rome. What is the message? You have 2 minutes. Go.
We'll accept you for now. And I suppose people.
I think they're trying to, get on Constantine to get aside.
They're trying to get on Constantine's good side?
Yeah.
How?
Well, in the top, they discredit the guy that he beat. And they're saying, you're great. And then they take, art from all the other monuments, these great emperors, and put it on his. They did it in a hurry since, it doesn't seem like it just seems like a big appeasement to me, where it's like, all right, this is the guy who just came in and, cleaned house. Don't kill us, don't kick us out, we'll support you,
You're part of the lineage.
Yeah.
You're part of the line. What?
This is in like 313 or 3 something, right?
313.
That's 4th century?
Yes, early 4th century.
I don't know whether one should be like 2nd century or 4th century.
Oh, yeah. Well, now we're counting forwards. So what century are we in? 21st, and the years are 20.
You have to be intelligent for that.
The Arch of Constantine was dedicated the very year that Constantine entered the city of Rome, but it was not completed when it was dedicated. It was not completed for another 3 years. It was dedicated in 312. That is, the Senate slapped this baby up, the outlines of it up, in a hurry, and had a dedication ceremony. And then it took a few more years for the entire edifice to be completed. What's the message? A message. So one message might be, you belong to the club. Here's the club. These good guys. Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. The story stops there. So not only are these good emperors, and emperors, I mean, that you get to be part of that club, because Constantine was not appointed. He seized power. He seized power even back in London. I mean, the whole thing is a power grab. But that's the thing about, people who win battles. You just rewrite the background story. So he gets to join the Emperor Club. But by now, those guys, I mean, Trajan is 200 years old. That's like saying, associating any modern person now with George Washington, essentially. Next. They don't show him. They don't show him in battle? No, that's not right. There are battles. There are on the, not on these two sides where you have the Oratorio and the Donatio, but on the other sides, there's the battle at Milan, remember, with the little cartoon figures falling over the side of the fort, plop, they're upside down and about to fall on their heads. And then the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. So those two battles are shown. So the Donatio shows what? Right, so think about the Constantinian friezes, because these are, so if the message of all of the panels is, the panels and the roundels and the Parthian prisoners is, we're going to associate you with these earlier emperors, what's the message of the friezes? So we have the Donatio, where he gives out the money. The Senate is like, yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, he's an emperor. He's not a divinity. So there are duties and responsibilities of an emperor, the largesse, the address to the people, but within the context of rulership, not the context of apotheosis. He is not shown the way, for example, Titus is shown in the chariot scene of the Arch of Titus with Victoria standing right by his side, sort of patting him on the back. You go, boy. Not like that. He's not shown next to it. He is shown in these friezes as a person.
I think the Senate is going to reassure people that there isn't war or anything.
And how are they? And how is the Senate reassuring people? So the Senate is clarifying, in fact, actually inventing the legitimacy of Constantine's rule with that inscription. And that would be reassuring. That's a good point. What else? There were a lot of hands. That is exactly what a very, very famous scholar of Roman art and sculpture says that the message of this arch is. That it's not you are, it's that you should. The Senate is saying to Constantine, look here, this is how it's done. You want to join this club? This is what you have to do. What messages are not in this monument that we have seen in monuments prior? What is not here or underserved, underemphasized? He's not hanging out with the gods. As in, what monument would that be? In the Arch of Titus, that is there to some extent. There's Titus in the chariot on the one side. Of course, there's just soldiers on the other relief, and then there's Titus being taken aloft to heaven in the apotheosis scene in the middle of when you're inside the arch and you look straight up. So he's not hanging out with gods.
There's not really any of like the struggle of war or the loss of war cost that's
There is not. There's none of the brutality. There's none of the hardship. Now, part of this is because
he was fighting against Rome.
part of it is that, and part of it is the way in which scenes are now shown. So when we talked about style, that style of the Constantinian friezes, that sort of caricature, almost symbolic, fast, make a single point style, not a realistic depiction like on the columns of Trajan or Marcus Aurelius. That means that what you have to do is pick a moment. It's not a process. On the columns of Trajan and the columns of Marcus Aurelius, war was a process, victory was the end. We started to reduce the episodes to a highlight reel on the Arch of Septimius Severus. Here, it's just a token. So you get the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, you get the battle at Verona, but you don't get any sense of the effort and the cost because you have these little cartoonish figures that stand in for the idea. And the idea is, we won. So you don't get a message of divinity. You don't get a message of effort, brutality, the cost of war.
Peace.
You don't get a message of peace. You do get a message of victory, but you don't get a message of peace. Those days are the good old days. Those days are gone. You have to wonder if anybody in the Senate could have even conceived of trying to send such a message. And what else do you not get, at least not very explicitly here, that we have seen in other monuments? What was part of the message of the Parthian Arch of Augustus? What was part of the message of the Parthian Arch of Augustus? You all the way in the back. Mind blank. The longevity of Rome. How?
Because it has the list of all the battles won from the beginning,
Beautiful.
all of the consuls.
Right. Right. Likewise in the Forum of Augustus. It's been a few hundred years since then, or 200, and it's just about holding on to the moment. Victory is about the moment. Peace is about the future. Peace is the future tense. It's the effects. It's what comes later. It's what comes next. That's not part of this story. The future is not part of this story, And the past is not part of this story. Just this moment. Or maybe it was just a joke. This was a comic that was in the New Yorker many years ago. That still cracks me up. Although, I know that you can all spot what's wrong with this. Can you spot what's wrong with this comic? Right. You cannot have the if you have this view with the Colosseum, you can't see the Forum. If you can see the Forum, you can't see the Colosseum. Ah! But you know it's the Arch of Constantine because of the roundels. All right. Constantine is not born a Christian, and he does not live as a Christian. He does not officially convert until he is on his deathbed. But he learns about and follows many of the Christian beliefs, as did many of the soldiers in Rome's armies. And that was brave because Christians were an underground sect, a persecuted minority, and by no means out in public in the Roman world in the years since Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem in the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, the successor to Augustus. So it's been a couple of hundred years, and Christianity is an underground religion. But Constantine vows the night before the battle at the Milvian Bridge, so October 27th, that in hoc signa vincas, under this sign, you will conquer, he says to his troops. And the sign is Chi Rho, the first two letters of Christos, the Greek appellation given to Jesus. It takes Constantine another 12 years or so to solidify his hold over the entirety of the Roman Empire. He defeats Maxentius, takes over Rome, so he's held Britain and Gaul and Iberia. By taking Rome, he absorbs all of the parts of the Tetrarchy that had belonged to Maxentius and before that to his dad Maximian. So that is Pannonia and Italia and then all of the provinces of North Africa. And he also adds on very soon after the area of the Balkans and modern-day Greece. But the entirety of the East remains under the rule of a competitor for the throne. So while all of this is happening in Rome, Rome, the empire, is not united. All the East remains under Licinius, this guy named Licinius. And it takes Constantine another several years before he is able to conquer Licinius. And when he does, in 325, or 324, he then becomes the sole ruler of the empire, the first sole ruler in over a century. Because throughout the 3rd century, there had been 60 emperors in various parts of the empire. And then when peace finally comes for a generation under Diocletian, it comes at the price of divvying up the empire into 4 parts, into the 4 parts of the Tetrarchy, which you can see in this colored map. The first thing that Constantine decides to do upon solidifying his grip over the entirety of Rome is to do right by the religious figure and the religion that he succeeded militarily under. And that takes him, or actually more accurately, his mother, to Jerusalem. In 324, Constantine sends his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem to find the spot where Jesus was buried and erect a religious building to commemorate that site. This will be the first church built under imperial patronage. Now, when last we checked, in Jerusalem, Titus, having been left behind by Vespasian in the year 69, when Vespasian sails off to Rome and is acclaimed emperor and founds a new dynasty, Titus has surrounded the city with a siege wall, and many, many months later, the Roman legions break through the defenses of the Judeans here in Jerusalem. They take the Temple Mount, and the stones along the top of the Temple Mount and the structures on the top of the Temple Mount are pushed down and destroyed. The city is sacked. People are killed. People are enslaved. Prisoners are taken. And the city is turned into an army encampment. Facilities are leveled. And in fact, archaeologists digging in Jerusalem have found huge deposits of ashes and burned areas covering all the levels of the Herodian city, the city that is destroyed by Titus. And for about a generation or so, Jerusalem is essentially a ghost town. The army legions hang out in this part of the city. So you're looking east now. Here's the Temple Mount. But in the time of Hadrian, he of the many travels, he who went visiting all over the place, he decides to refound Jerusalem as a classical city. What do you need for a classical city? What do you need for a classical Roman city? What would be the very first thing that you would need? A wall, not necessarily, not if it's inside the empire and things are at peace. What's the first thing that the Romans build in the time of the Republic? A forum. You need a forum. We're going to get a forum, but that's not the first thing that they build. What's the first big building in Rome? Temple to who? Jupiter. Jupiter who? Yes. That Jupiter and no other. Jupiter Optimus Maximus. And that's what we get here. Here's the coin. Hadrian had a family name of Aelius, Aelius, and he renames Jerusalem Aelia for his family name Capitolina. And on the area of the Temple Mount, where the Jewish temple had been that was sacked by Titus, and that event was commemorated in the Arch of Titus, a temple to Jupiter was constructed. And here's the coin to prove it. Colonia. job. Yay, Dan. All right, so we have the secondary cardo, which you can see here in this aerial view. You can still make out. That goes to, and a main cardo, which is there in aerial view. You need a forum. Actually, in Jerusalem, there were two. Here's one. And this is if you walk in Jerusalem today, you can walk underneath this arch. This is one of the arches that were part of the gateway that entered the forum. This is part of the colonnaded street of the main cardo, the main street. And that led to a great big open forum. And this is part of that forum right here. Here's some of the columns that surrounded it. So you have a temple of Jupiter, you have a monumental gate, you have a grid system, a cardo with colonnaded sides, and you have fora, two fora. Now, in the time of Jesus, the area of that forum was not inside the walls of the city. In the time of Jesus, here were the walls of the city. By the time of the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 69 and 70, the city had erected, the citizens of the city had erected another wall. And that's this wall. In other words, at the time that Christ was crucified in the 20s CE, this was outside the city walls. Why does that matter? It matters because after he was crucified, he was taken in haste to a grave. And graves are not inside city walls in classical cities. There are cemeteries all around the modern walls of Jerusalem, and in the area of the Forum of Hadrian, down at the lowest level, there was a cemetery. It looks something like this. This is not that cemetery, but this is like that cemetery. There are rock-cut tombs. You would walk. So this is the natural bedrock on which Jerusalem is founded, and here's the tomb. You walk down into it. In the 1st century CE, there was the wall of the city, and outside the wall there was a tomb, an underground tomb. When Hadrian established Aelia Capitolina in the 2nd century, he built at one end of that main forum a temple to Venus. This is the wall of the temple, part of the foundation wall. The temple and the forum covered over the area where this 1st century CE graveyard had been. When Helena comes to Jerusalem, 200 years after Hadrian established his city, there is a small Christian community there, and there is a bishop of the community. And there is a tradition in that community of the spot where Jesus was buried. And the bishop, whose name was Eusebius, tells Helena that that spot is under the area of the Temple of Venus. And Helena orders that the Temple of Venus be removed and finds underneath there graves, because that's what was there, and claims to find inside one of those graves fragments of the cross on which Christ was crucified, and orders a monumental construction to overlie the area of the tomb, and in front of that, to build a large basilica as a church in honor of it. And that is the building that we have today called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, meaning the Church of the Holy Burial Ground. Haile Segraba is the Holy Grave, and it is marked in this rotunda, and this is the area of the basilica. The rotunda was 70 feet in diameter. In front of it was an open-air courtyard. This is not a church. This is essentially a martyrion. This is a place where somebody holy or important is buried, and people want to come and be in the presence of the grave. In other words, it's a marked grave. And then, separated from that by this open-air courtyard is the Basilica of the church itself. Already in the time of the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, prior even to its dedication, pilgrims began coming to Jerusalem. This plaque was found at one point when there was some shoring up work that was being done in the lower levels of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, found in an area of construction work. So it was something that, it's graffiti, and it was covered over when the church was actually dedicated. The church was built from 326 to 335. It was dedicated in the year 335. And the plaque shows a boat. The mast has the sails furled, so the boat is at anchor. The inscription is in Latin. Nobody in this part of the world speaks Latin. They speak Greek and Hebrew. They spoke Greek and Hebrew. And it says, Domine ivimus, Lord, we have come. So what happens is that along the Cardo of Aelia Capitolina, blocking off now the area of the Forum, where the Temple of Venus had been, facing out into the Forum, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre now communicates directly with the street itself. Here's the front opening of the church, kind of gathering area, a courtyard, the Basilica of the church, the courtyard in front of the Martyrion Rotunda, and then the rotunda itself. Those are the parts that are constructed. Now, I ask you to consider this question. Can the Church of the Holy Sepulchre be classified as a religious building of classical type? Let me remind you of some other religious buildings of classical type. What site is this? What site is this? What building is this? All right. I want you to think of 3 things that these buildings have in common and 3 things that are different. 3 things they have in common and 3 things that are different. Go. You don't have to remember anything about it. You have to, but think about like placement.
Yeah.
It's like under the
Yeah, and that becomes a style of churches is they have that entryway. Kind of a separation between the church and the street.
How do people get up there? Oh yeah. There's a path through the forum, and then there's an entryway up here, and then there's a great big gathering area here. All right, let's start with possibly the easier, something that's different about this as opposed to these structures. You know, that's an excellent point about being part of the city or being separated, but I would argue for exactly the opposite interpretation. I mean, recall that this is, I don't know, 20 feet. We're not talking about, this structure is no further away from this house than, I don't know, I am from the elevator. It's a separate building, but it's not separated from the city in which it sits. In that way, actually, that I would say is a similarity.
The church has courtyards built into the structure to a little bit like I noticed that Temple Jupiter also has a courtyard, but it's not a part of the structure, it's just a temple at its own area. Whereas the church, the courtyard built into the building itself.
That is a very interesting point, which will lead us directly to another point. So here the church has a gathering space that's part and parcel of the structure itself. It's sort of a built-in gathering space. But the Capitolium in Rome and even the little shrine at Zagora have gathering spaces. That's why this space is open in front of the little temple. And in fact, this forecourt or porch is obviously much, much, much smaller, but is a kind of specific place that separates you. You don't walk directly up to the altar. It separates you from the altar. So structurally, that's the same. And the altar, in fact, here is right here, is actually outside. And this is an open area in front. So there are open areas for gathering for all three. That's a similarity. But you point to a difference. Where does worship or cult activity really take place here? Inside or outside? It actually takes place outside. Because you can't sacrifice and have a fire inside the building. Where does cult activity take place here? You have this big impressive building, but what's the actual ritual that takes place? Well, eventually, sure, but there's an altar right here in front. And what takes place at an altar? Sacrifice. That is the heart of classical religious practice. And it takes place outside. Where does worship or whatever take place here? Inside. So that's the difference. Well, sure. I mean, the structures are different fundamentally. They're different sizes. They're different styles. This is old style. This has the addition at the back end for the Martyrion. So, this is 2 rooms, and they have different size rooms and different forms. The outer form is different for all of them.
I was wondering about with the classical ones, you derive the points for the building by the mountain, the size of the columns in it. Where the basilica certainly has a bunch of columns, where it seems the dominant feature is the dome, and that seems to credence that.
Well, that's a special aspect of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because the Sepulchre is here. Constantine establishes 3 other churches, or his mom does, establishes 3 other churches in Jerusalem, and they're all like this because they don't have the. So this is part of this complex, but the church. This is actually the church. Is this? Yeah, the dome is a kind of outlier piece of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. No denying it. Something that they have. So we have a couple things that they have in common. They all have gathering spaces. They're all really part of the city itself. What is another fundamental similarity? Fundamental similarity. And what's their purpose? And what else? Think back. Think about how we were comparing this structure to, let's say, Unit 4.1 at Nicoria. What's the significant difference between this and Unit 4.1 with which it is contemporary? And in Phase 1 of Unit 4.1, practically identical in terms of form. What is the significant difference? What is the significant difference about the function of the building? The function of the building. What? People lived in Unit 4.1. Is that what you were going to say? Well, but I would like to ask you guys to stop using that language and to start saying something specific about the function. So how do we know? That's a conclusion. Remember way back at the beginning of the year, I told you, you have to start with a fact, and then you can move in one direction or another from the fact. Don't start with a conclusion. Start with a fact. So what do we know about Unit 4.1? What do we know about it? They're household objects. And so what's the function of it? It's a house in which lots of other things also happened. What's the function of this? Religious. What's the function of this? What's the function of this? What else? Anything? No. It is a single purpose structure. Perhaps we can all agree that Aelia Capitolina, the city established by Hadrian, is a classical city. It's got all the parts. Is Jerusalem in the time of Constantine a classical city? Yes? No? Agnostic? Waiting for class to be over? No? Nobody votes for this city in the time of Constantine to be a classical city? Okay, so wait, let me just remind you. We have a monumental gateway. We have a colonnaded street, 2 of them. We have a forum, and we have a religious building in honor of a god who is worshipped by the people of the city and has a structure similarly situated in that city as the Temple of Jupiter is in Rome, or even that little old temple was at Zagora. Why would you not say this is a classical city? Just because the name of the god is different?
Well, didn't you say it acted more like it's large camp?
Not after Hadrian establishes Aelia Capitolina. There's a camp down here, but all of this part is a city with gates and houses and shops and fora and colonnaded streets and. It didn't really change, so would it still be a classical city? So did I persuade anybody? Who is not persuaded? No, this is not a classical city. Admit it. Come on, you can admit it. Why not? That's the difference. It has inside worship. There's no sacrifice. There's worship inside. The character of worship is different. I agree. What you want to think about is if that is enough. Because think about what you are saying, and this is the point of today's, partly what we're doing today, and then both lectures next week. Here's what we're looking for. When does classical antiquity end? It ends. It ends sometime. We're going to get to the Middle Ages. It's going to be over. The things that make it classical are going to end. Is this one of those points? That's what you have to decide. We'll have 2 more chances to think about that next week.